In our Comparing Every Plastic videos, we've explored dozens of plastic blends from Discraft, Innova, and Trilogy brands. And every company has their quirks, but in our quest to explore and understand the differences in flight from plastic to plastic, we discovered a pretty bold claim about Discmania's new Q-line plastic.
Basically, us at Discmania truly believe that this is the most innovative tool disc golf has come up with since the beveled edge disc.
And that is quite the claim. But beyond that claim, at Discmania, things are far from straightforward. So before we get to their supposedly revolutionary Q line, there's some history to explain, because the plastic is in the details. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs, and let's talk about Discmania's plastics. And as I outlined in a previous video, Discmania, up until very recently, didn't make their own discs at all. They began partnering with Innova way back in 2006. Innova manufactured the discs for Discmania, and that lucrative partnership spawned some of the most popular discs in the game, including the FD, a straight fairway driver, the MD3, a workhorse mid-range, the P2, one of the most popular putting putters around, and of course their slightly modified version of the Destroyer, the DD3. And during this time, all their plastics were made by Innova. S-Line was basically Star Plastic, C-Line Champion, and so on. And after over a decade, Discmania decided to diversify and partner with Latitude 64 to manufacture a new line of discs called the Evolution line. Seemingly designed more for amateur players, the Evolution line mostly featured discs that were a lot less aggressively overstable, like the Instinct, Enigma, or Essence. But it also gave Discmania opportunities to experiment, as Latitude 64 was more willing to try crazy ideas, like the now iconic Tilt. Around the same time that the Evolution line got going, Discmania started up another partnership with Chinese manufacturer Yikun Discs, producing beginner-focused discs called the Active line. Beginner-friendly discs like the Sensei, Astronaut, and Mermaid had both entry-level stability and entry-level prices, sometimes less than $10 a disc. And in hindsight, maybe Discmania knew that this partnership with Innova was sort of on its way out. Because in June of 2021, they announced that they were ending their 15-year-long partnership with Innova and would open their own manufacturing facility. But just deciding one day to be a manufacturer is pretty complicated and very expensive. Discmania may have had some of the most popular discs in the game, but they didn't own those molds. Innova did. So in order to start manufacturing, Discmania would have to redesign their popular discs, or reinvent as they called it, hoping of course that they would fly the same in a new plastic blend. Discmania set up their own manufacturing facility right across the street from Latitude 64, partnering with them on the manufacturing technology. The rest of their reinvented line of discs followed soon after, along with them joining on with the House of Discs brands. Now that we're up to speed on Discmania's history, let's talk about the three discs that we're going to focus on today and the different plastics that we have available. First, we have the P2X, a chunky beaded putter popular among many of Discmania's touring pros. Next, we have the Evolution line's Origin in 5 different plastics, including 2 base plastics. The Origin is rated as a straight mid-range, though many people know that it tends to be a little more understable. And then of course we need to take a look at the DD3 with the new Q-line plastic against S-line and C-line. But let's kick things off with the P2X. Rated at 2301, the P2X is a straight to slightly overstable putter designed with Gannon burr. It has a flat top, blunt nose, and a chunky bead, and it correctly draws comparisons with Gannon's old putter, the Prodigy PA3. In fact, it feels nearly identical apart from the plastic, of course. And speaking of the plastic, let's talk about the 4 different blends that we have. First up is our only premium plastic. In fact, it's the only premium plastic the P2X has been released in, C-Line Glow. C-Line is Discmania's premium translucent plastic. We have 3 other base plastics, including this Flex 2 D-Line. Discmania's base blends come in different levels of stiffness, rated as Flex 1 being the softest, and Flex 3 being the firmest. So next, we have a Flex 3 D-Line P2X. And again, the only difference here is the stiffness. It is super hard. And last but certainly not least, we have the 2025 World Champion Edition in a special Flex 3 P-Line Glow. Discmania describes their new P-Line plastic as the most durable base plastic ever made. And that's a bold claim, though I'm not prepared to test that durability today. We are, however, prepared to compare the stability of these 4 P2Xs. And we'll begin with the Glow C-Line P2X, and Josh's first throw is just a little bit high, and maybe a little bit more hyzer than we're looking for, but it definitely looked very overstable. And on a lower line with much less hyzer angle, it's still super overstable, fading out quickly to barely over 200 feet. And that means this C-line P2X is quite a bit more overstable than the flight numbers of 2301 might suggest. But how will the base plastics fare? Well, the stiff glow P-line P2X is also fairly overstable. Here on 2 different throws, it hesitates briefly before beginning to fade, but again, it's a pretty aggressive fade. And it does at least get decent distance compared to the C-line glow, pushing out closer to 280 feet or so. The Flex 3 D-line also has plenty of overstability. On a similar angle to the P-line, it has maybe just a tad more fade, but very similar distance. However, our Flex 2 D-line had something different in store, because suddenly what has been a reliably beefy putter on every other throw and every other plastic is now pushing much straighter. And the difference is not just the shape of the flight path, because in terms of distance, the Flex 2 D-line P2X pushes well beyond 320 feet. For reference, here in the field that we throw in, this fence is right around the 300-foot mark, while that tree line in the back is 480 feet. And we will need that farther distance reference when we talk about the DD3s. But let's quickly summarize how these P2Xs flew off the tee. C-line glow, beef. Flex 3 P-line, beef but farther. The Flex 3 D-line, also beef but farther. And Flex 2 D-line is straight distance beef. So we've seen the stability of these putters off the tee, but to be completely honest, I don't see base plastic putters being everyone's go-to for tee shots. I expect people to putt with them. So can we see any difference between these putters from, let's say, the edge of Circle 1? No. What about from the edge of Circle 2? The good news here is that the P2X is just as overstable on the putting green as it is in the air, but it also has no glide as well, and was very different from the pixels that I'm used to. So let's move on now to some Evolution line plastic, because at least for now they are still making some of their Evolution line discs, though the same cannot be said for their active line, which has been discontinued. This is the Origin. The straight mid-range of the Evolution line, it's rated at 5.5, -1.1. And we have had a blast testing the Origin on our channel. In fact, spoiler warning for a pretty old video at this point, but it was the farthest flying mid-range we tested in a previous Flight Numbers Don't Matter test. Today we'll be looking at the Origin in 5 different plastics. Exosoft, which is a soft, tacky base blend. Geo, which is a stiff, less tacky base blend. Neo, which is the Evolution line's standard semi-translucent premium plastic. Neo Lumen, which is simply a glow version of Neo. And finally, Meta, a pearlescent, semi-translucent premium blend reserved for special editions like this Kyle Klein Midnight Prowl 2. And let's see these in quick succession to compare. Up first we have the Meta Origin, that from a slight hyzer release, flips up to flat, turns over, and drifts off to the right. Oh, and as I mentioned earlier, despite being rated at 5.5, -1.1, the Origin is almost always much more understable than that. Anyways, moving on to the Neo Lumen Origin, from a slight hyzer release, it flips up to flat, turns over, and drifts off to the right. But definitely just a little bit more turn and less forward push than the Meta Origin. Next, the Neo Origin, from a slight hyzer release, flips up to flat, turns over, and drifts off to the right, almost exactly like the Neo Lumen. And the Geo Origin, from a slight hyzer release, flips up to flat, turns over, and drifts off to the right, but doesn't go quite as far as the premium plastics. And finally, the Exosoft Origin. You guessed it, from a slight hyzer release, it flips up to flat, turns over, and drifts off to the right, almost exactly like the Geo Origin. Now, even though these discs don't really fly at all like their flight numbers for Josh's power, I am impressed. Not that it's so understable for a supposedly straight disc, but that it's so consistent. Considering we have 5 different plastics, 2 base blend, 3 premium, one of them's glow, it's actually pretty impressive how consistent they are. In fact, there's actually a little detail I didn't share with you, because the Meta, Neo, Neo Lumen, and Geo Origins are all around 175 grams, but the Exosoft Origin is only 147. and it still flew a nearly identical flight to these heavier discs. So shout out to Discmania, because it's rare to see discs this consistent. And in addition to that consistency, we should also give a shout out to the Origin, because in addition to the flights that you saw here, you can manipulate angles and get sweet hyzer flips like this, or massive distance turnovers like this, pushing well past 400 feet. How about that? But let's be honest, this is the disc that we've all been waiting for, and what Casey White is calling
the most innovative tool disc golf has come up with since the beveled edge disc.
And as bold claims go, that is very bold. First, let's unpack a few things, because you may not yet be familiar with Discmania's new Q-Line plastic. Q-Line is a new premium plastic that Discmania is using in their new Premier Series DD3 and FD. Prototypes of these discs were given out to some of the team members at Worlds this summer in Finland. And the reason Casey claims that this disc is such a huge innovation is all about weight distribution. All discs in disc golf have more weight out on the wing and less in the center, because the flight plate is thin and the rim is thicker. There's just more plastic material out on the edge. But the more weight that you have out on the wing, the more gyroscopic stability you get from your disc. In fact, this scientific fact is the entire premise behind MVP's gyro overmolding technology. And while Discmania, like many companies, could just claim that their Q-Line is amazing and super fantastic, they decided to go a step farther. Just the other day, they dropped this ad, where they cut the flight plate out of 12-speed distance drivers from the, quote, top brands, which, after scrubbing through the video carefully, looks to be an Axiom Neutron time-lapse, an Innova Star Destroyer, one of their own S-Line DD3s. This is a Discraft Force, most likely an ESP plastic, given that all the rest of these are premium opaque blends. And what they go on to show are these numbers. Their own DD3, along with 3 other brands, have between 73.1 and 74.9% of the disc's weight in the rim. And then we get the results of the Q-Line Premier DD3, which has 77.8% of the weight in the rim, at least 3.9% more than the 3 competitors. But again, what is this for? Well, it's for distance. More gyroscopic stability means the disc can stay aloft longer. It should, in theory, have a smoother turn and fade, and more of a forward push late in its flight. But trying to achieve this weight distribution is challenging. The Q-Line does feel really thin here in the center of the flight plate, certainly thinner than most discs. But it is technically possible to make a disc thinner, though perhaps it's not a good idea. This is a flight plate test disc from Protoflight. You may know Protoflight from a video we made last year. They cut their discs on a CNC lathe rather than traditional injection molding, and that allows them to experiment with dimensions that just aren't possible inside of a mold. And if you listen to the difference here between these two discs, you'll hopefully get the impression that this flight plate here is incredibly thin. I am just barely touching it, and you can see how it warps. Now, there's obviously some drawbacks to this. You don't want the flight plate to be too thin, because then it's too fragile. A stick's going to go right through there when it hits a tree, or conceivably you could just break it through the force of throwing. So, the numbers of the Q-Line are obviously impressive, but beyond the distance question itself, I think we want to know, is Q-Line a realistic, viable alternative as a premium plastic, or is it just a, showing off the capabilities of the technology? And of course, how does its stability compare? Which means, without further ado, let's get this Gannon Burr Q-Line DD3, as well as the stock S-Line and C-Line DD3s, in the air. Up first, let's see the C-Line. And pretty much in line with all of my previous experiences, the C-Line is pretty overstable. But on a slightly lower line and with a touch of anhyzer, you can shape shots out to the center of the fairway. But with such an aggressive fade and minimal turn, we're only hitting around 375 feet here. Now, obviously, a nicely seasoned, beat-in C-Line DD3 could go farther than that. In fact, Josh has some of those in his bag. But we're interested in the stability off the shelf. So moving over to the S-Line DD3, for Josh at least, it's actually quite a bit more understable. This throw here was honestly the least amount of turn that we saw from the 10 shots or so that he threw with it. And even with all that turn, it does get a nice sort of forward fade, pushing it just beyond the 400-foot mark. But remember, for reference, this fence is about 300 feet, and that tree line at the end of the field is 485. And the first thing I want to say about the cue line is that it was incredibly consistent. Nearly every single throw for Josh was exactly the same. Smooth turn and smooth fade, just like this. And comparing it to these other DD3s, it did have a lot more distance, averaging around 450 feet. But before everyone jumps on the cue line bandwagon, I want to slow down and say, I don't think that this is a thorough enough sample size to say that cue line is some incredible revolutionary new technology. Obviously today, in this minimal test, we had a pretty significant difference. I think you just need a much larger sample size to say with confidence that it is indeed much better and much farther flying than these other plastics. What I can say is that the cue line feels great, it flies great, and it might be a huge step forward in disc golf technology. Maybe. I think the proof will come when we see cue line used for different molds, with different speeds, different stabilities, and crucially, for that to happen, Discmania needs to sort out a couple production issues. First and foremost, it took several months to get these cue line DD3s produced to celebrate Gannon Buhr's World Championship victory. And their Triumph Series cue line FD for Ella Hansen's third place FPO finish at Worlds, along with the FD for Niklas Antala's third place finish in MPO, have both been delayed due to production issues and a lack of cue line material. In fact, they said something really interesting in this, that cue line is a lab-created material, which I would love to learn more about. Very interesting. But again, it's not in full production. So for the time being, I think this means that cue line is really going to be limited to special edition runs, Triumph Series, and celebration discs. And that means that this potentially revolutionary technology is going to take its sweet time getting off the ground. And it might be some time before we can just put it in our bag whenever we need to. Have you thrown the new cue line? Do you think it's a huge step forward in disc golf technology? Is it the greatest thing to happen in disc golf since the beveled edge disc? Let us know in the comments below. And also comment below what plastic-related tests and comparisons you'd like to see in the future. Remember, the plastic is in the details. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg, making the very bold claim that we'll see you in the next one. But just deciding one day that you're going to become a manufacturer is not easy. It's and on a lower line with a just came out here to record some putts with the P2X. I wonder if they like the sound of chains. And finally, Meta, a pearlescent semi-translucent. Every disc in disc golf has more weight out on the rim than it does in the center because the flight plate is thin, and it might be a huge step forward in disc F. Josh, what do you want to say to the blooper reel?
Stay in school, don't do drugs. Play disc golf.
If you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, or becoming a member. Your support makes this content possible.